guys for coming. If you haven't noticed, the subject for this teaching, this 6-part series, is going to be the theology and the spirituality of the laity. So what does it mean to be a layperson in the world today? Or what is the church's vision for the laity? Right? A lot of times it's like getting involved with the church can mean a lot of things, and we kind of wonder, what am I supposed to do? How am I, what does that look like in my family life? What does that look like? So hopefully the goal is by the end of this that we can have a kind of systematic and an easy approach to what it means to be a layperson within the context of the church, right? So the first question that we're going to ask is, frankly, who are the laity? So who are the laity? That question is always answered in a negative way. It's always answered, the laity are not clergy. They're not priests, they're not deacons, they're not bishops, or they're not religious. So it sounds like the laity is a bunch of knots and nothing. It's like there's nothing positive to it, right? It's just kind of leftovers. Well, what ends up happening, I think that is one of the like kind of those symptoms that we see in the culture, in the church, that the laity just don't get, like the dignity of the laity seems to kind of be squashed, right? Where it's like, oh man, I have to be a priest, or I have to be a deacon, or I have to be a nun, or I have to be something to actually have a dignity within the church, right? Well, hopefully that's one of the major sins post-Vatican II of the laity, is that we have to do something so that we'll have a dignity. That's a big problem. So what I'm going to do is, I was looking at the documents, I'm looking at a lot of things, and one of the best explanations of who the lay people are comes from Cardinal Orenzi. Cardinal Orenzi is an African cardinal, and he explains the laity as those who by baptism are incorporated into Christ and are sent to witness Christ in the secular sphere, right? So first and foremost, who are the laity? They're baptized. They're baptized. By the very sacrament of baptism, we're adopted as children of God. So if there's ever a thing that gives us dignity, it's that, right? There's no greater dignity than being a child of God. I think that's something that we miss a lot. It's like, oh, the baptized, and we forget about it. No, baptism is a huge thing. It's so much bigger than what we oftentimes give it credit for, right? We kind of lose baptism in the back of our mind. It's the rite of passage so you can do something else. But baptism is an adoption. Baptism is what opens the gates of heaven to us. Without baptism, we're condemned. Like we're in trouble, right? So baptism is a big deal. It's a lot bigger deal than what we actually kind of give it credit for. So like when you go to a baptism of a baby, just because the baby can't feel anything or doesn't like come out smelling like roses, doesn't mean that something miraculous, something major hasn't happened to that child's life. So I think that one of the problems of the lack of dignity that we attach to the laity is the lack of dignity that we attach to the sacrament of baptism. So it turns into a sacramental issue more than it is an ecclesial issue, if you follow me. The second piece that I've highlighted in that definition is that they're sent. The laity are not called to just come to church, do the church thing, and leave, right? Being sent isn't being sent into the church, it's being sent out of the church. Being sent means that we're going to come here to be nourished, but then to go out. And that leads directly into the third point of the secular sphere. Where is it that a layperson can go that a priest can't? Like, it seems like, oh man, a layperson can't do anything a priest can't. But wait, who is it in the boardroom on Monday morning at that meeting when they're talking about that ethical question that's supposed to stand up for the Catholic Church? It's not the priest, it's the lawyer. or it's the businessman? Who is it that on the back of the garbage truck is going to be the one that's going to share the gospel? It's not the priest. It's not the deacon. It's not the nun. It's the garbage man. Who is it that's going to be a doctor and is going to, whenever he's going through and teaching a couple about fertility, is going to teach them about fertility in the context of the church? It's not going to be a priest. It's going to be a Catholic doctor. See, this idea of having to be Catholic, to be like, to have a dignity, we have to be within the structure of the church, the corporate structure, is a lot. Because the church needs to permeate all of this stuff. The church needs to act in the boardroom, at the water cooler, on the baseball field, like everywhere. So those are the three pieces. We need to hold up a dignity of baptism. We need to understand what it means to be sent. And we need to understand where the laity's mission field is. It's in the secular world. Right? So we can move on to the next step. How many people have heard of, how many people in here have had somebody say, get involved with the church, and one of these things has been said? An extraordinary minister of Holy Communion, serve on the pastoral council, run some kind of ministry, be a reader, an usher, or sing in the choir. Those kind of things. Raise your hand if that's what you've always thought is getting involved with the Catholic Church. Because I can honestly say, yeah, that's what it sounds like. Right? That's not it. if our sanctity, if our mission as as Christians, if the laity's mission as the faithful of the church is basically to come up here and be an extraordinary minister of Holy Communion, if that's the pinnacle of your existence in the church, we've got a problem. Right? If singing at Mass, which can be beautiful and a prayer, and yes, but if that's when we say, what do you do for the church? And you say, I sing at Mass, you're setting the bar a little bit low. Right? The activity of the layperson is not necessarily what we do on Sunday. Right? It's what we do Monday through Saturday. It's what we do out in the world, in the secular sphere. John Paul II, whenever he wrote a beautiful document. Now, I'm pulled from a lot of different documents, so if you see on the slides, if you see like some kind of Latin words that you don't quite understand, I'm going to try and explain them. But if you have any questions, ask me after, and I'll be glad to explain it. He wrote a document called Christi Fidelis Laity. It basically means the lay Christian faithful. Okay. And what he said in here was, this comes out about 1988. In 1992, he comes out with a document, another document on priesthood. Now that document, the 1992 one, has basically reformed what seminaries do. They've completely changed everything about how priests are formed in the seminary and after the seminary. And it's a beautiful thing, and it's like turned around a lot of the issues in seminary formation over the last 50 years or so. This document came out before that. It meant to do the same thing for the lay faithful, and it's never been cracked. It's never been picked up, it's never been looked at, and it's just kind of lost on the staff. There are two temptations that he talks about in here. So if you read it, the temptation of being so strongly interested in church services and tasks that some fail to become actively engaged in their responsibilities in the professional, social, cultural, and political world. That's the first temptation. So basically, we're too focused on the church activity here, like the building, the place, right? And we don't go out. We ignore that whole idea of being sent. So that was his first thing. That was his first warning. That was a temptation that the lay faithful were going to fall into. His second, the temptation of legitimizing the unwarranted separation of faith from life. So, basically, making it a legitimate thing to make my faith personal, where it doesn't affect anything else in my life. That is a separation of the gospel's acceptance from the actual living of the gospel in various situations in the world. So like this temptation is the person that comes up, and a lot of our Protestant brothers and sisters, they'll say, are you saved? Yes. Well, why do you do this, right? Like, so basically when my faith is so private that it doesn't have any effect on anything else I do, right? So you have a separation of faith and life. So these are the two temptations that John Paul II kind of sees in 1988. Now, I don't know about you, but 1988 is almost 30 years ago now. It's 28 years ago. And I think compared to what our social structures were in 1988 to what they are now, we've kind of hit a tailspin. And he saw this coming 30 years ago. So I think it's about time for the lay faithful to stop playing around with these two temptations, which is something that happens a lot. It's because, so basically, all of those things, both of those temptations are working directly opposed to this idea of having a secular character to the lay spirituality, the lay call, the lay person's call in the world. Lumen Gentium. So this is the document on the church from Vatican II. Vatican II happens early 1960s. A lot of things change. Most notably, the priest turns around. That's what most people remember. But there was a lot of other things going on at that time. One of them was basically they tried to clearly define the roles of different people in the church. One of them being the laity. And they have a very telling sentence on what the church defines as the laity's nature. Like, what is the laity supposed to do? What specifically characterizes the laity is their secular nature. The laity are supposed to be out in the world. The laity, it's not about the building, it's not about here. The laity is for the secular order, right? I'm going to hit on that ad nauseum, so don't worry. If you were at Mass yesterday, you heard this gospel, Matthew 5, and it was very fitting because I happened to actually be preaching Mass yesterday here, and I was doing all my research, so my homily was written. So, in Matthew's gospel, Matthew 5, this is the very beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. So like this is Jesus' biggest homily. Right? This is his biggest sermon that he's given to the people, that he wants to make sure you take these teachings. What's at the beginning of it? You are the salt of the earth, but if salt loses its taste, with what can it be seasoned? It is no longer good for anything but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. Continuing, you are the light of the world. A city set on a mountain cannot be hidden. Anybody in here that cooks knows salt has a taste. And you put too much salt, you ruin a dish real quick, right? Because you can put only so much in, you can't take out. Right? Can we give me some head nods? Right? This is why I love my mom, but she does not put salt very much. Because you always aim for the lowest common denominator with people. Because you don't want to overdo it, right? So, if salt has that taste, if salt permeates everything, and that's what Jesus is saying the faithful are supposed to do. You are the salt of the earth. That's your call, is to permeate every bite. Like season every piece of culture. That's your call. You are the light of the world. In a hurricane, can a light be ignored? Can like a flash of light, like a hurricane, power goes out. Can a flash of lightning be ignored? No. A flashlight in a dark room, it can't be ignored. A candle, the smallest flame of a candle, can't be ignored in a pitch black room. Why? Or not why. What is Jesus pulling out there? A layperson, a faithful Christian, living it out in the world. You can't ignore it. You cannot ignore somebody who's living a Christian life and living it to the fullest. You can't ignore that. You can't ignore a family who has a prayer life together. There's something about that family. There's something about those people who are holy. Right? Mother Teresa, she would walk in her room, you couldn't ignore it. You could sense holiness walked in. John Paul II, you could sense holiness walked in before he was Pope. Right? Now both of these, not lay people, that's the lay person's call. Everyone knows those people in your family, those people in your communities, those people in your circles of life, who when they walk into a room, holiness walked in. Like you can just feel it. You're talking to them, you're around them, there's a sense of just, yes, the Spirit, the Holy Spirit is with this person. That's the light of the world. That's what we're called to. That's the dignity of the layperson. Lastly, again from Lumen Gentium, the laity live in the ordinary circumstances of family and social life, from which the very web of their existence is woven. They are called by God that by exercising their proper function and led by the Spirit of the gospel, they may work for the sanctification of the world from within as leaven. Now when you think about leaven, yeast in bread, you only need a pinch. A little bit and it affects a lot. So we've got permeating everything. We've got cannot be ignored. And we've got just a little bit of holiness affects a lot. It has a huge effect. Salt, light, and leaven. It's a threefold way for like a threefold effect of the laity in the world when they're living out with that dignity. Right? Like when they're living from that sense of that dignity of like, this is what I'm supposed to be. I'm supposed to be Christian. I'm supposed to live this out. There's another one. It's a lot less known. It's not in the Vatican document. It's not in Scripture. The image I'm about to pull out is one that was in like the early 200s, 300s, like one of those first centuries of the church. This was a letter that was written from an official in Rome to his superior. Right? I think the superior's name is Diognetus. It's not important. But in that letter, he starts to break down what's the deal with these Christians. You got these Christians that are living in the Roman Empire, and they want to know what's going on with these guys. These guys and girls, like, there's something different about them, but we don't quite know. This is part, now I encourage you, it's on the handout. If you need the spelling and stuff, it's there. Please take it and read it. It is a beautiful document. But one of my favorite lines in it, to sum up all in one word, what the soul is to the body, Christians are to the world. The soul is dispersed through all the members of the body, and Christians are scattered through all cities of the world. The soul dwells in the body, yet it is not of the body. And Christians dwell in the world, yet are not of the world. The invisible soul is guarded by the visible body. And Christians are known indeed to be in the world, but their godliness remains invisible. The soul of a human person is what animates the body. Like Theology 101, soul away from body equals death. Right? That's what animates the body. It's a soul. If the Christian is the soul of the body of the world, we're the ones that animate the body. We're the ones that animate all of the workings of the world. Without the Christian, the world ceases to exist. Death sets in. So when we think of like St. Paul talking about we're all the body of Christ, like our job is to be the soul of Christ interspersed in society. Like that's heavy. That's heavy. The imagery that they use is very beautiful. It's of the body, but not of. Right? There's this distinction between the Christian and the world. On the side and on your handout, there's a small, at the very bottom of the first page, I have two kind of funky looking phrases. Right here. Fuga mundi and consecratio mundi. Fuga mundi sounds like an appetizer at an Italian restaurant. It's not, don't worry. I'm kind of hungry. Fuga mundi. F-U-G-A. In Latin, it means flee. It's think of the word fugitive, right? The person that flees from prison. This is the root of it. Fuga, flee. Mundi, in both of these, means world. And I think you can get what consecratio means, especially since the answer's on your paper. So, why do I have these two terms up there? Fuga mundi is a term that's kind of like a scholarly term that's used. It explains what was going on early in the Christian church about around the time of monasticism. So whenever you have in the 300s, 400s, somewhere around there, I'm not a dates guy, so if you fact check me, I will probably be wrong on dates. But in the early centuries of the church, when all these things, when like the Christian life is really starting to roll, at the very beginning it was persecuted. After a little while, we went from persecution to acceptance and legal, like the Christian life was made legal. Like Christianity was not a legal thing in the Roman Empire anymore. And people got stagnant in that. So what happened is, after a while, people started to flee the world. Fuga mundi, Latin term. Rome kind of makes it, that's why it kind of came up. And that's where your earliest monks came from. People that would renounce all the possessions, all the things of the world, and they would go out to the desert, the hermitage, and they would do their own thing, where it was solitude, them and God alone. Right? That kind of mentality is beautiful for monastic life. That kind of mentality is beautiful for someone who's called to be a monk. That is not the mentality of the layperson. And it's what often happens in our churches, where the building of the church, Sunday afternoon, Sunday morning or Sunday evening, Saturday evening, when we come to church, well, good, we're protected. Good, we got this thing, we're going to do it here, and then when we leave it there until we come back. Right? That 1 hour on Sunday is what defines us as Christian, other than the 127 other hours. I think I did that math right. But that's not the mentality of the layperson. The mentality of the layperson is to be the salt, to be the light, to be the leaven, to be the soul. It's to consecrate the world, to consecrate the secular order. So it's to consecrate the lawyer's office, it's to consecrate the back of the garbage truck, it's to consecrate the ball to God. The good that is there, great. We accept that, we love that, and that's where we find Jesus. The bad that is there, we reject it. That's why the church has survived for as long as it has. That's what the call of the church is. Take in what we can and reject what we can't. So if we continue, the scripture that I read at the beginning of the day, like the scripture that I read at the start tonight, was this line, you go into the vineyard too. Now the question is, why do you stand here all day? So why, if this is the call of the layperson, why have we not moved? Why have we not gotten started? Like why are we kind of stagnant? Now, there's a lot of reasons. I don't claim to say that this all is one, but I know, like, I've heard it a lot, like being in confirmation classes and things like that. The quote that everybody knows from St. Francis, this one: preach the gospel at all times and when necessary use words. St. Francis didn't say that. They did. They've done studies, like Franciscan scholars have broken down all of his writings as like 200 years around his life. There's no evidence that he actually said that. There's a spirit in that, oh man, it sounds good. But I think what oftentimes happens is it turns into an excuse. Of like, oh, I'm living a good life, that's good enough. Right? I've actually had those conversations with people where I'm like, hey, what's the catechism say on that? Or what does the scripture say on that? And they can't say it. Well, I'm Christian, but I kind of like do my own thing. You know, I mean, me and God, we good on our own terms. Well, do you go to confession? No, I don't believe in that. That doesn't make sense. It does not make sense, right? Are you Catholic? Yeah. You said you've been doing this with your girlfriend, but do you go to communion? But yeah, it's cool. You know, that works out. Me and Jesus are on the same page. No, you're not. No, you're not. Because this idea of where we can just kind of live our own life, do our own thing, and people are going to see it, that works. It does. Like the council, the Second Vatican Council right here in a document that's specifically on the laity talks about the necessity of deeds, right? The very testimony of their Christian life and good works done in a supernatural spirit have the power to draw men to belief and to God. So like our witness through our deeds, yes, that speaks a lot. But that's not the whole thing. It's not an either or. We're Catholic. We love both ends. We love both ends. Most of the time, it's not an either or. It's a both and. And when in this case, words and deeds. A true apostle looks for opportunities to announce Christ by words addressed either to non-believers with a view to leading them to faith, or to the faithful with a view for instructing them, strengthening and encouraging them to a more fervent life. So, we look for the opportunities to non-believers to share our faith, and we look to opportunities to people who do believe in the faith, who do believe in the Christian life, to help encourage them, to strengthen them, to educate them, to bring them a little bit closer to Jesus. Like, that's the call, is to do both of these in our day-to-day. Like, you think about that. If you're living your life where you have your deeds, you're doing the good works, you're helping out the poor, you're giving them money, whatever, and you're finding those opportunities every day to share with somebody else the way God's worked in your life, that's a full day. That is a full day. Do one good deed a day and find one person to share the gospel with in your life. Do that. Start there. To do one of each every day. That's going to be a full day. Like, it's going to be a hard day. And when it comes to a word, a lot of times we think like, man, I don't know the Bible. Or, I don't know theology. Like, I can't do that. Testimony works there. Share who you are. Share what God has done in your life. Because there's no one that can... If you come up to me, Jen comes up to me and tells me, this is what God has done in my life, I can't argue with her. I can't argue with somebody's testimony. Oh, really? I can accept it or reject it, but I can't argue it. It's a safe way to share the gospel. Upon all the laity, therefore, rests the noble duty of working to extend the divine plan of salvation to all men of every epoch, which is every age, and in every land. Upon all the laity rests this duty of spreading the message of salvation to the people. People of every land, people of every time. Like, for the last 2,000 years, the church has existed with this calling on them, that all of the laity are sharing the plan of salvation. One of the most interesting things I find with the Bible, if you ever get a chance to like just read through stuff, you realize that like there's a lot of different genres, right? Like there's some stories like where it's just kind of like things, but then it's like a letter to the, like all of St. Paul is letters to different churches. So the last thing, like chronologically in the gospel, the last thing in the story of the Bible is the very end of the Acts of the Apostles. So if you read the Acts of the Apostles and you read the last couple of verses, the story just ends. Like, there's no big climax. You would think like if it's like any other book, it would have like this huge climax and everybody ends happy. Like the person just stopped writing, probably because they got killed. But they just stopped writing. Like it was written and then they stopped. There's nothing special. There's no kind of like sign off. There's no. It just ends. And I use it kind of as an image of like, it's because that story's continuing. Like that story has gone on from 2,000 years ago. It went on while it went on with the Jews, with the Old Testament. It went on 2,000 years ago when Jesus was alive. It continued to go on in the early church, even though it's not in the Bible. But that's what we find out from the tradition. Like it continued through there, it continued through the Middle Ages, it continued through the Protestant Reformation, all the way up to our doorstep today. And like, how are we doing continuing to write that story? It's the duty of the laity to continue writing that story. It's the duty of the church today to continue to build on what the apostles did 2,000 years ago. To continue to build on what the Carmelites did in the 1200s. To continue to build on what Thomas Aquinas was doing in the Middle Ages. To continue to build on what the post-Protestant Reformation, the way that the church founded, like kind of came back to its bearings. Right? Like it's our job to continue that now. No one else. It's us. And it's the lay person's call to do that. Like, I don't know about you, but that's a pretty heavy dignity that all of us can take part in. Because of our baptism. Like, it's from our baptism that we're given that call, that we're commissioned to do that. So, the way this class is generally going to work is we're going to follow a very simple and oftentimes very familiar triad. Relationship, identity, mission. Relationship, identity, mission. RIM. R-I-M. In that same document that John Paul II wrote in 1988, he has these two sentences. And it's funny because they actually sum up everything about that triad. If anybody's familiar with it, it sums up all of it in two sentences. Only from inside the church's mystery of communion is the identity of the lay faithful made known and their fundamental dignity revealed. So it's only from within communion with the church. Only from within communion with the church, communion with God, is the identity of the lay faithful made known and dignity revealed. Only within the context of this dignity can their vocation and mission in the church and in the world be defined. So, relationship. Only from within inside the church's mystery of communion. Right? So our communion with the church as a whole and our communion with God. Only from that relationship can we come to understand our identity and our dignity. Only from that identity and dignity can their vocation and mission be revealed, be defined, be understood. So, the way we're going to do this class, basically, tonight is going to be about relationship. The next three classes are going to be on identity. Identity as a priest, a prophet, and a king. Stay tuned. We'll cover that next week, over the next 3 weeks. Because that's the threefold office of Christ that we're baptized into. Priest, prophet, and king. The second to last class is going to be on mission. What do I mean by mission? This class is going to probably be the most practical of the classes. We're going to look at what does it mean to live as a layperson, as authentic Catholic within my family. What does it look like to do that and to work? Like, what does a theology of work look like? What does my spouse and I, how do we live it? Maybe pulling from Theology of the Body, but also pulling from Pope Francis's recent letters on the family. Right? What does it look like to kind of figure out and discern this whole thing? That's going to all be on our mission. That's going to be in our mission class. And then the last class, which isn't up here, but I think it's important that we can hit on it. We're going to look at how do we understand and see this play, this kind of this relationship between the laity and the church, like the laity and the clergy, particularly at Mass. Earlier in one of the slides, the words active participation came up, or they're going to come up. I think they're going to come up. Like, what does it mean to actively participate in Mass? Like, if all that list of stuff, like singing at Mass and being an usher and all that stuff, if that's not what I'm supposed to do, then what am I supposed to do at Mass? Like, I do that once a week, at least, right? Like, what is that supposed to look like? That's what we're going to hit on in the last class. In that last class, I talked about Andre, we're also going to have Mass. So not only are we going to talk about it, we're going to do it, right? So that's just to give you kind of I know some people are like the type A personality, they want to know not only where we are, but where we're going. That's where we're going. This is going to be our model for the entire class, right? So if we continue, relationship. We're talking about a relationship. We're not just talking about like when we look at our relationship with God. If we're looking at our relationship with God as like what we do at Mass, and only what we do at Mass, that, that's good, but it just kind of seems like then we're just going through. We come in here, we come into a church, we sit down, we stand up, we get our little treat at the end, and then we leave. Like, if that's all it is, if we're not bringing anything else, if we're not trying to kind of reframe our participation in Mass as something deeper than just coming to get the Eucharist and leave, it turns into just kind of going through the motions and leaving, right? Like confession, same thing. If we come and all we do is we look at the confessional as oh yeah, I go in, I say my little piece, say like I did this 3 times, I lied, I punched my brother, like okay, done, and then I leave. Like it kind of is just like, why I gotta do that? It loses in a way, like for us, it loses the meaning behind it. Sacrament works, but it kind of like, why are we doing it, right? A relationship with God has to grow. It has to be something that's organic. A relationship with God works the same way as anyone else. Like if I call a complete and utter stranger is to call me tonight, I have no idea what that is. I get their name, maybe like a couple things, but I probably won't remember them, and like that's it, right? I don't have a relationship with them. If a friend of mine, who I met maybe like a year or 2 ago, if they would be to call me, I'd probably recognize the voice. Hey, how you doing? But it's not as deep, right? If my best friend from childhood would call me, like someone that I might have been like really getting to know over a few years, and like we've grown close over a long period of time, and like we never really lost touch, that relationship's a little bit more intimate, I'd probably recognize the voice a little bit quicker, right? The second my mother calls me, I know exactly who it is. No matter what, I know who it is. Right? It absolutely, and everyone here knows, like, that person's voice, your spouse, if they call you and they speak in that tone of voice, you know what's going on. Right? A relationship, it's something that's built. It continues to mature. It's not an encounter. It's not a one-time thing. It's something that has to not only be established, but it has to be matured and nurtured. In our relationship with God, we find a very tangible way where that happens. Baptism is where we're adopted. That relationship is established. We become a beloved son. We become a beloved daughter in the eyes of God. That's where that dignity is first established. That's where we receive this new dignity, this new life, right? Through confirmation, we see that we receive the Holy Spirit, and that early adoption comes to maturation. Like we become an adult kind of thing, right? Like all those terms that are used around confirmation. But there's a maturing of our faith that happens in confirmation. And then every time we receive communion, that relationship is continued to be nurtured. We continually are nurtured. Like these three sacraments, they're the sacraments of initiation in the church. Why? Because they build and they establish and build up that relationship with God. They're the way that we know it works. Cardinal Renzi, again, he says, the lay apostolate is a participation in the saving mission of the church herself. All the laity, through their baptism and confirmation, commissioned to the apostolate by the Lord, or are commissioned to the apostolate by the Lord himself. They are nourished by the Holy Eucharist. See, Cardinal Renzi agrees with you. And then further, we see also here, and this is where that word active participation comes up, in that same document on the laity, this life of intimate union with Christ and the church is nourished by spiritual aids which are common to all the faithful. We're going to get to that in a little bit. Especially active participation in the sacred liturgy. These are all active participation. These are to be used by the laity in such a way that while correctly fulfilling their secular duties in the ordinary conditions of life, they do not separate union with Christ from their life, but rather, performing their work according to God's will, they grow in that union. So our work in the world is not supposed to pull us away from the stuff we have to do. Our work in the world is not supposed to pull us away from the relationship. We're called to be in a relationship with God. No matter what. We're called to be there. So, the way I like to explain this kind of point is like, the idea of being Catholic. We don't say we do Catholic. We say we are Catholic. Right? It's not something else that we do. Like if you imagine a table with like a bunch of little trinkets of like things that you do in your spare time, in your free time, like things that are in your life that are cluttered. Is Catholic one of those things? Is your faith one of those things in the midst of everything else? Like bringing the kids to soccer practice and studying for finals and going to church, like is it on that level? Right? Cooking for the family is all of those things on the same level. Because those things, those ordinary things of life, are not supposed to pull us away from union with God. Those ordinary things perfect it. Those ordinary things are a way we live out our vocation. Right? So Catholic isn't just another thing that we do. It's who we are. There's a deeper piece right there. We define ourselves as Catholic. Right? We don't define ourselves as a soccer mom. Like we should. We define ourselves as Catholic. We just happen to be doing the whole soccer mom bit. Right? That's what this is talking about. We're called to grow in union. We're called to grow in the union with God. This relationship is supposed to be something that like permeates our life. Like, does our relationship with God actually have an effect on what we do in our family? Does our relationship with God, like, because I'm in a relationship with God, do I do the whole soccer mom bit better? Because I'm in a relationship with God, do I see it as a service to my family when I cook, as an act of charity? Because of my relationship with God, like, does studying for finals become a way of mortification or a way of becoming holy? Right? Like, does this relationship permeate? Because that's what we're called to do. We're called to grow in union. The place where we're going to grow in union with God more than any other is in our personal prayer life. I'm sorry. The place that we're going to grow after the sacraments with God more than any other is our personal prayer life. As a family, like praying with your spouse. Like, that's the way that we grow. Like I said in the homily this past weekend, that's the way we grow together as a family, but it's how we have to grow here. This relationship has to be the strongest relationship in our life. Stronger than our spouse, stronger than our kids, and I know that sounds really kind of radical, but which relationship lasts forever? Which relationship is it that we're judged on? Right? Now, we love God through serving, forming our kids and bringing our kids up. We love God through making sure our spouse gets to heaven as well. But is loving God our end? Because that's how we're called to love everyone. That agape love, that self-sacrificial love, that love that basically we give all to those who God has given to us. That's how we grow in union with the Lord. A lay person grows in that union in the ordinary, day in and day out, little things that aren't huge, that aren't really pretty. Like cleaning diapers, wanting to choke your kids at night. That's where a lay person becomes a saint. It's in the ordinary stuff of life. But that's the call, is to sanctify the secular order, to sanctify the world. For a college student, to sanctify the campus that you live and work on. For a single person, sanctifying the office building that you work in, or your circle of friends. For a family, to sanctify the people and the situation you are in. That's what it means. That's where we grow in union. Father Mark's going to give us a little bit of an understanding of what prayer is.
One of the questions that I'm asked a lot is, what is prayer? Oftentimes people in the pew, oftentimes priests themselves, have a real desire for God and have a real desire to grow deeper in their relationship with God, especially through prayer. And it's really important for us to kind of wrap our minds around that question, what is prayer? For so many of us, we were taught how to pray, or we were taught how to say our prayers when we were kids. Prayers like the Our Father or the Hail Mary and the Glory Be were the real stuff of our early catechesis in prayer, but as we got older, many of us didn't learn how to pray as adults. And as we reach the seasons in our life where we really need God or we desire more from God, a lot of the times the structures of our early childhood, the structures of the prayers that we said when we were kids, don't really satiate the desire in our hearts, especially as adults. So what is prayer? A lot of times people think that prayer is something that they have to do. And certainly our initiative and certainly our spiritual discipline is important. But it's really important for us to ground ourselves in a Christian posture or a Christian anthropology, a Christian lens through which we can look at prayer. And the Catechism defines prayer. In number 2567, in the Catechism we read that God calls man first, that man may forget his Creator or hide far from His face. He may run after idols or accuse God of having abandoned him. But the living and true God tirelessly calls each person to that mysterious encounter known as prayer. In prayer, God's initiative of love always comes first. Our own first step is always a response. That's good news. That's from the Catechism. The Church herself is reminding all of us of a couple key things when it comes to prayer. Number one, that God calls us first. And God not only calls us, but God never gets tired of calling us. Regardless of whether we forget God or hide far from His face, regardless of whether we accuse God of having abandoned us or run after the idols in our lives, God never gets tired of reaching out to us and calling us. So the first thing we want to remember is that God's initiative always comes first. Secondly, the Catechism says that prayer is an encounter with God. That when you and I sit down to pray, whether our experience tells us that we feel alone or we feel dry or nothing's happening, the truth is this, that God got there before we did. Before you sat down in the chapel to pray, before you eased into your lazy boy to pray, God arrived first. God is there first. His presence was there before we got there. And so finally, the Catechism says that prayer is simply a response to a God who is taking the initiative, who is tirelessly reaching out to us, and who wants us to simply receive from his heart. So essentially what the church tells us is that prayer is a response in relationship to a God who is desperate to be in relationship with us. My encouragement for all of us as we pray is to perhaps look at the Catechism, perhaps linger in number 2567 from the Catechism. Let yourself just linger there and let the Lord speak to you as he desires to share his heart with you. God bless.
So the quote that he has, you have on your paper as well. God calls man first. What is it? The way he says it. God tirelessly calls each person to that mysterious encounter known as prayer. Like, think about that. God's tirelessly reaching out to each and every one of us here for that encounter known as prayer. There's a weight to that. That's heavy. That the eternal God is calling and reaching out to each and every person here. For what? A deeper relationship. That's what God's looking for. He continuously and tirelessly reaches out to each one of us and calls us first to that relationship. Like, it's very fitting that we did tonight in the chapel. As we came in and God was here. Like, God's here. We all came and we were responding to that invitation to a relationship. And through words and actions, this drama engages the heart. That's where this relationship takes place. That's where this relationship takes primacy over every other relationship. This relationship infiltrates, this relationship seasons every other relationship that we have. If this is on point, everything else is put in proper context. It's put in the light of the eternal. So I added, for the last slide, my favorite scripture quote. Remain in me as I remain in you. This is Jesus' final word, like some of his final words to his apostles from John's Gospel. Just as a branch cannot bear fruit on its own unless it remains on the vine, so neither can you unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever remains in me and I in him will bear much fruit, because without me you can do nothing. Without focusing on the relationship with God first, without being first here, understanding our relationship here, we'll never come to understand we'll never come to know what our true identity is, what the true dignity is that we have. And if that's the case, as John Paul II laid out, we'll never know what to do. We'll never know which direction we're supposed to go. We have to be first and foremost in relationship with the Lord. That has to be our primary goal.